here goes. I've got my soundboard laid out, got all my marks made for the bracing that I'm going to put inside. Now you can choose to do a number of different bracings that are out there on the market. Obviously Gibson's a hugely popular one. It's a very traditional. Taylor has some out there. I kind of have a modified Taylor. I kind of, from my own standpoint, modified it a little bit just to give myself a little bit more structure in the soundboard. Again, the one I made prior sounds really good, so I'm gonna go with that. So I have all my marks made and laid out, have all my supports cut and radiused, because again, there's a radius to the soundboard and the back plate on a guitar. You can research that. So I'm gonna get these glued up, get them done in this jig, held in place with some fiberglass rods that I got from StewMac. And first time I did it, I actually had some old fiberglass tent rods. It worked as well, but I went ahead and ordered some of these fiberglass rods. They're a little bit more flexible, I think, than a tent rod, so it actually should work a little bit better for me. So we're gonna get these glued in place and let these dry overnight. Want to be sure to get a good glue covering on the whole underside of the truss. You can always clean this off. Sorry, the support, I called it a truss. You can always clean it off afterwards, you know, kind of keep the glue from getting all over, but I guess don't be bashful with the glue at this point is kind of my point. So I'm going to get these laid generally in place where they're going to go. We're going to move these around. Obviously, they move around on the glue quite a bit. And again, we'll, you know, with the chisel, we'll shape all these afterwards after everything's dried. So. Should have brought a glue rag over here. Again, I'm just kind of laying these out on my marks that I have already pre-laid out on here. Already drawn them on the back of the soundboard. You know, the important thing that I realize working with this guitar, acoustics, everything, you know, everything's really got to be in line. I think that's the key for me that I really learned through all this is that just keeping everything in line is very, very important. And by in line, I mean in that straight line that, you know, is in line with the neck and the center line of everything in the body. So it's very critical to kind of keep everything all squared and centered. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try to get these held in place, and then we'll work on those others. So now you're just taking this rod, bending it in place. That's it, and it holds it in place right there. That's where this jig comes in handy that I made last time. So again, there's a lot of different websites out there for making these jigs. And I would encourage you to look at some of those. So. Sorry I had to cut out there. I had to get a couple of blocks put in place here because the old tent rods that I used on my first acoustic, just a little bit shorter than these, so it didn't quite jam in there very well. So had to get a couple of blocks cut real quick and get them in place. But you can see how it is now, and this basically, all the pressure on these fiberglass rods holds the face of this down into this cupped template that I made. So what happens is when I take this out of there and that glue's all dry, it has a crown to it on the outside. If you look at guitars, you'll see that the fronts and the backs have a shape to it, which allows the sound acoustically to bounce around and move around in there, which I guess helps with the resonance, if I'm using all the right terms. Those of you that are real luthiers could probably correct me, and feel free to do so. So anyways, that's where I'm at. I'm gonna let this dry overnight. We'll take this one out and we'll work on the back plate tomorrow, put that in, let that dry, and we'll work on getting that assembled onto the body. Good morning, welcome back to Jordan's Everyday DIY. If you recall yesterday, we glued up our soundboard and our gluing jig. Had all the fiberglass rods that held all the bracing in place, and took that out this morning. It's a little cold right now to glue the back plate, so I'm gonna do some marking on this and show you kind of how I laid this out. If you see here, this is somewhat of a modified Taylor bracing version. Again, I mentioned yesterday, Gibson has one. It's completely different. This one I like symmetry for some reason. So I happen to like this one and made a few modifications to it myself. But anyways, if you look at this, there is, not sure you can see it on the camera, there is a cup to it, which is what you want. So when we glue this on the body, it's got a nice shape to it for the acoustics. So my plan now is to lay this back on the jig where it was, line everything up. Remember, I mentioned everything needs to really stay in line. I try to keep it in the same place on the jig all the time. This was my layout jig that I created for all my bracing. This is just a piece of plastic that I cut it out of. It's been rough. I broke a couple pieces off of it already, but it does allow me to mark everything up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay this back on my layout. And what you can see here, I hope, is some marks. And what that shows me is that all these braces have to be shaped with the chisel. And I'll show that later, but if you've seen some videos, there's some luthiers that are incredibly good at that. But what I did is I just put marks on my jig so I can lay that back over my bracing right now and go back just with a pencil and make my marks. And from there is where I'm gonna shape out so that I keep everything consistent between my guitars. So that's kind of how I laid out this jig to work. So first I lay it on my soundboard, I mark where everything goes, and then I glue the braces. When I come back, I lay this back over the top, and then I can make my marks for where everything gets shaped, so if that makes sense. So I'm gonna do that now. May also do some sanding inside the body while I wait for the weather to warm up a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll glue up that back plate for the guitar. All right, it has warmed up a little bit, so we're gonna go and we're gonna glue up the back plate for this guitar. If you recall, I have a mahogany back plate. This is my jig, similar to the one I made for the soundboard, that I've got everything laid out and I marked it. So I can take this off now. Again, I'll use this later. I'll lay this back over my bracing. This is the pattern of my bracing, the spine and the bracing that goes across. And I've got my marks in here where I'll need to shape those and bevel those as well. So set this aside for now. I've already got my braces and my spine cut and sanded. Again, these have a radius on it based on the back. I believe this is a 15-foot diameter on the back. Again, research that stuff, you guys, so I'm not misspeaking at all. But I believe that was it when I created this a while ago. So we're gonna get these glued in place based on my marks and leave this in the jig all night, just like we did the soundboard. So again, we're gonna wanna be generous with our glue. We can always clean it off later, so wanna make sure everything is completely covered. and that one's glued up. Let this glue overnight. We'll take this out. This will have a nice little shape to it as well. Get some of the glue cleaned up. Get the bracing marked so that we can bevel the edges. Getting closer.